A single moment that changed everything. Have you ever witnessed someone try to embarrass a leader on national television, only to create the most unforgettable broadcast in history? You're about to see something that will challenge everything you believe about respect, strength, and true leadership under pressure. Picture this. It's Tuesday evening in the heart of Manhattan. Television cameras are capturing every moment. Millions of viewers across America have tuned into their regular political discussion show, anticipating the usual fierce exchanges and memorable quotes. Nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold, a moment so authentic and profound that it would freeze an entire nation. Seated in the guest position was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the youthful president of Burkina Faso. His presence wasn't meant to spark controversy or generate headlines. The invitation was simple. Discuss African sovereignty and America's involvement in West African politics. Straightforward enough, one would think. Opposite him sat Karoline Leavitt, the razor-sharp former political communicator famous for her biting commentary and lightning-fast responses. Here's what made this encounter fascinating. These two personalities weren't expected to collide. The show's producers had arranged for a respectful conversation about international relations, but live broadcasting sometimes takes unexpected turns. Approximately 20 minutes into the discussion, Captain Traoré was thoughtfully explaining his nation's viewpoint on Western influence in African politics. His tone was calm, his arguments well-reasoned. Nothing provocative, nothing aggressive, simply facts presented with quiet authority. Then Karoline made the decision that would define her legacy forever. She pushed forward in her chair, extended her finger toward him, and with maximum condescension, delivered two words that would resonate globally. "Sit down, boy." Complete silence engulfed the studio, the kind of quiet where even breathing sounds loud. The host's expression showed pure shock. Home viewers gasped in disbelief. Social media platforms immediately erupted with reactions. But Captain Traoré's response was unlike anything anyone anticipated. No shouting, no dramatic exit, no raised voice whatsoever. Instead, he demonstrated something far more impactful. He simply gazed at her with the composure that comes from a person who has experienced genuine hardship, real sacrifice, and authentic leadership responsibility. Then he rose from his seat, not in fury or outrage, but with the quiet dignity of someone who bears the hopes of an entire nation. What followed next will give you goosebumps. He moved toward the stage's edge, faced the stunned audience, and began speaking in such a gentle tone that everyone strained forward to hear every word. "I originate from a land," he began, "where young boys must grow into men before they can even dare to have dreams." The camera operator focused in closely. Every person in that audience remained motionless, captivated by each syllable. "You may address me as boy on your platform," he continued, now turning his gaze directly toward Karoline, whose arrogant expression began to crumble. "But in my homeland, boys shoulder entire nations. They struggle so others won't go hungry. They guide because no one else is willing." You could witness it happening in real time. Karoline's facial expression was transforming. Her self-assurance was evaporating. She wasn't confronting some politician she could intimidate into silence. She was staring at someone who had endured experiences beyond her comprehension. Captain Traoré was far from finished. The studio lighting seemed to soften as the atmosphere grew more intense. His voice became even quieter, more intimate. "I laid my father to rest beneath the open heavens," he shared. "No media coverage, no formal addresses, just earth, stillness, and my mother's heartbreaking sorrow." An elderly African-American woman in the front section had tears flowing down her cheeks. This transcended politics. This was pure truth, unfiltered and raw, being shared with millions of Americans who suddenly faced something they weren't ready for. "He perished during a military takeover financed by foreign interests," Traoré continued, briefly glancing toward Karoline, whose eyes now searched nervously around the space. "So when you commands it down, boy, are you referring to the boy who witnessed his community destroyed? The boy who studied by candlelight because electricity never returned after colonial departure? Here's where the moment became truly extraordinary. One of the other panel members, a distinguished U.S. military veteran, quietly placed his hand over his heart. Recognition filled his eyes. He understood. He knew the meaning of service, sacrifice, and carrying tremendous responsibility. Captain Traoré's voice stayed steady, though his eyes showed unshed emotion. "You don't need to appreciate me," he said, looking directly into the camera, now addressing every viewer at home. "But you will not make me disappear." A single applause sound echoed from the studio's back, then another until the entire room exploded with appreciation. People weren't simply clapping, they were rising, not from sympathy but from respect, recognizing something genuine in a world filled with artificial moments. And Karoline, for the first time since recording began, appeared diminished. But the story becomes even more remarkable. As the applause faded, Captain Traoré looked down briefly, carefully selecting his next words. When he lifted his gaze again, his eyes held something more powerful than anger or pain. They were filled with love. "You observe a soldier," he said, "but I was raised by a woman who labored with her own hands." He paused, allowing the weight to settle. "My mother sold wood for fuel. She traveled great distances in deteriorating shoes so I could attend school. She concealed her own hunger so I wouldn't experience mine." The camera switched to Karoline. Her smirk had completely vanished. "She never instructed me to sit down," he continued. "She taught me to stand up, especially when it causes pain." A young girl in the front row whispered to her father, just audibly enough for the microphones, "He reminds me of you, Daddy." That's when grown men throughout that studio began weeping. "So when someone like you calls me boy," Captain Traoré said, his voice remaining controlled but his emotion evident, "you're not insulting me. You're dishonoring every mother who ever carried a nation on her shoulders." The silence that followed felt sacred. Even the host appeared emotionally moved. What Karoline intended as an insult had unveiled something beautiful and powerful, and America was witnessing it happen live. Then something unexpected occurred. The U.S. Army veteran panelist, Colonel Jacob Whitmore, stood up. This decorated, respected man with silver hair and decades of military service behind him spoke with a trembling voice. "He's absolutely correct," the colonel declared, and everyone turned toward him. "I served in Liberia. I've witnessed what young men like him endure." His hand shook slightly as he gestured toward Karoline. "Calling him boy, that isn't debate. That's degradation. Your words dishonor every courageous service member I worked alongside in Africa." Complete stillness filled the room as Colonel Whitmore approached Captain Traoré and offered his hand. "Captain, thank you, not only for defending your people, but for showing us what genuine leadership represents." The two men clasped hands while the audience applauded again, this time with tears of respect and hearts full of admiration. Even people unfamiliar with Burkina Faso sensed something profound and authentic unfolding. But Karoline wasn't finished embarrassing herself. Her face turned crimson as she felt control slipping away like sand through her fingers. This wasn't the planned outcome. She expected humiliating him would earn applause, perhaps even make her a champion to her supporters. Instead, it was backfiring spectacularly. "Oh, please!" she snapped, her voice sharp and frantic. "Are we seriously pretending he's perfect now?" The room actually recoiled. People gasped audibly. Captain Traoré remained composed. He turned to her and simply stated, "This isn't about perfection. This is about humanity." Karoline was spiraling, looking to the host for support, but he merely stared at her in disbelief. "What's next?" she barked. "We apologize for being Americans." That's when a young black student in the audience rose. Her voice cracked with emotion as she responded, "No, you apologize for being heartless." It wasn't just a reply. It was pain exposed on live television, and everyone could feel its impact. Karoline realized she was defeated. She had completely misjudged this man, and now her arrogance was unraveling before millions of viewers. As Captain Traoré returned to his seat, the camera focused on his face. He wasn't angry. He embodied something far more threatening to people like Karoline. He was peaceful, centered, and completely unshaken. The young student who had just spoken quietly returned to her seat, her eyes still fixed on Karoline. You could sense the shift in the atmosphere. People weren't just watching a political discussion anymore. They were witnessing a moment of truth that would be remembered for years. Karoline attempted to recover with a forced laugh. "Come on, this is America. We're entitled to disagree." But nobody joined her laughter. The camera swept across the crowd, showing tears in people's eyes, hands pressed to hearts, faces being wiped with sleeves. Captain Traoré leaned forward slightly. "Disagreement is beneficial," he said softly. "But disrespect destroys dialogue, and when you destroy dialogue, you destroy understanding." The applause that followed was different, slower, deeper, like a mourning song for something that had died in that room. Karoline sat frozen, watching her insult get buried beneath something she never anticipated: human truth. Then Captain Traoré did something that shattered everyone's composure. He gently retrieved a folded, worn letter from his jacket pocket. The paper showed tears at the edges, clearly handled countless times with tremendous care. "This was written by my younger brother," he said quietly. 2 days before he was killed during a demonstration. He was protesting for food. The studio went completely silent. Even the applause stopped. People held their breath. He carefully unfolded the letter, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. The host leaned forward, visibly moved as if afraid to breathe too loudly. He wrote, "Big brother, if I die, promise me they won't forget the reason why." Captain Traoré held the letter toward the light. Some audience members audibly gasped. Others wept openly. "So, no," he said, his voice steady but heavy with loss. "I will not sit down because I carry the memory of those who were forced to kneel." Karoline blinked rapidly. Her hands trembled beneath the table. For once in her life, she was completely speechless. Outside the studio, on social media platforms, the clip was already spreading rapidly. People nationwide were sharing it with a single word: watch. But the evening wasn't over yet. As Captain Traoré gently returned the letter to his pocket, an unusual quiet settled over the room. Even the production crew had stopped moving. No whispers, no paper shuffling, no phone typing, just an entire nation holding its breath. The host finally found his voice. "Captain Traoré, is there anything you wish to tell the American people watching right now?" He looked directly into the camera with those calm, powerful eyes. "Yes. You don't need to know Burkina Faso's location to understand dignity. You simply need to know what invisibility feels like." He leaned closer to the camera. "I've never requested pity. I ask for eyes that truly see." Karoline's jaw tightened. Her plan had completely collapsed. She was no longer the show's center. Captain Traoré was commanding attention, not because he demanded it, but because his truth spoke louder than her voice ever could. Then something shocking occurred that nobody anticipated. One of the camera operators set down his equipment, stepped onto the stage, walked over to Captain Traoré, shook his hand, and whispered loudly enough for the microphones to capture, "Thank you for reminding me what honor looks like." That was just the beginning of what would become a national moment of reflection. The room remained frozen, when a middle-aged black woman in the third row slowly stood up. She didn't request permission to speak. "I didn't come here intending to speak," she said softly, "but I need to say this." Everyone turned toward her, including the cameras. "My son served in Afghanistan. He returned home in a flag-draped coffin." Her voice broke with years of carried pain. "He was called a boy, too, even while wearing his uniform." She looked at Captain Traoré with tears streaming down her face. "When you spoke, it felt like my son stood up again." The gasps echoing across the room were audible even through television speakers. The camera zoomed in on Captain Traoré, who gently nodded. No words, just shared pain and understanding. Karoline appeared ready to interrupt, but even she could sense it. This wasn't her moment anymore. This belonged to something much larger than politics or television ratings. Then the woman added something that broke the room wide open. "America needs men like you, not loudmouths who talk over pain." The crowd erupted into a standing ovation that seemed endless. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was becoming something bigger. A reckoning with how we treat each other, how we listen, how we recognize dignity in every human being. Karoline had heard enough. "This is a setup," she hissed into her microphone. "This isn't journalism, it's emotional theater." The host slowly turned to her, then removed his earpiece. "Karoline, the cameras are rolling. You created this moment. You just didn't expect it to respond." She slammed her cards down, stood up, and declared, "I don't need this circus." Then she stormed off set, her heels echoing like gunshots across the floor. The audience didn't boo. They didn't cheer either. They simply watched her leave in silence. Then someone from the audience whispered what millions of people were thinking. She couldn't handle the truth. The camera panned back to Captain Traoré, still seated, still calm. "I didn't come here to shame her," he said quietly. "I came here to speak truth." The host swallowed hard and said, "Well, the truth is sitting right there." And the world continued watching. During the commercial break, producers were scrambling. Phones buzzed nonstop. Emails flooded in from news outlets worldwide. Then a message arrived from the White House press team. Just 3 words. "We saw everything." Nobody knew exactly what it meant, but everyone understood it mattered. When the broadcast resumed, the host leaned in one final time. "Captain Traoré, do you believe America can truly hear people like you?" Captain Traoré looked into the camera with quiet strength. "Yes, but first America must listen when it's uncomfortable." Then he shared a story nobody expected. "Last year, I visited a children's hospital in Chicago. A little girl there, just 8 years old, had drawn a flag combining Burkina Faso's colors with the U.S. flag. She said, 'You're both fighting for us.'" The camera showed more tears in the audience. "That child," he whispered, "understood more about unity than most adult leaders do." That's when it struck viewers across the nation. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about heart. It was about seeing each other as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. By the end of that night, the video had gone viral in unprecedented ways. People were pausing dinners, stopping conversations, gathering around phones and televisions in kitchens, bedrooms, buses, and barbershops across America. The hashtag #SitDownBoy transformed into a trending movement, but not in Karoline's favor. It became a moment of national reflection. Clips were shared with captions like, "My father called me crying, said this reminded him of 1963, and I showed this to my students today. Half the class couldn't stop crying." A teenage boy from Atlanta tweeted, "I didn't know who Captain Traoré was an hour ago. Now I want to be like him." What was intended as a takedown had transformed into a national awakening. Before Captain Traoré could answer the host's final question, An elderly white man in military dress stood up from the audience. He held a cane in one hand and wore medals on his chest. "Before he answers," the man said, his voice trembling with emotion, "may I speak?" The camera zoomed in as he continued. "I served in Vietnam. I lost friends. I came home angry. I watched this country tear itself apart multiple times." He pointed at Captain Traoré. "But never in all my years did I witness a man speak with such grace after being disrespected like that." He turned toward the camera. "America doesn't just owe him an apology. America owes him respect." There was no clapping this time, only tears. Even the host bowed his head in reflection. Captain Traoré slowly stood and shook the veteran's hand. Two soldiers from different continents sharing one painful truth. That image would also go viral because sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with simply listening to each other. Just as the broadcast was about to end, the host received a note that widened his eyes. "Captain Traoré, we have a surprise guest on video." The screen behind them illuminated, and there she was, the same little girl Captain Traoré had mentioned earlier from the Chicago hospital. "Hi, Captain," she said, waving a red, white, and green paper flag in her tiny hand. "You remembered me?" The entire room melted. Grown adults were openly wiping their eyes. "You told me I was brave," she continued, her smile absolutely radiant. "But tonight you were the bravest." The audience broke. People wept openly. Even the host wiped his face with a tissue and whispered off mic, "My daughter's the same age." Captain Traoré's lips trembled, his eyes glistening as he placed a hand over his heart. "You give me strength," he said to the little girl. "You are the future I fight for." She nodded proudly, then said something nobody expected. "Next time someone says, 'Sit down, boy,' I'll tell them to stand up like Captain Traoré." The feed ended, and the audience didn't just stand up. They rose because this wasn't just television anymore. This was history being made in real time. Hours later, Captain Traoré sat quietly in his Washington hotel room. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from world leaders, celebrities, veterans, mothers, and children. But it was a handwritten letter slid under his door that made him pause breathing for a moment. It was from the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. It read, "Dear Captain Traoré, tonight you didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for every soul who was ever told to sit down, boy. We are preparing a permanent exhibition titled Dignity Under Fire. We would be honored to feature your words, your story, and the moment that changed the world." He set the letter down and quietly whispered, "Not for me. For all of them." Outside his window, crowds were gathering, not in protest, but to say thank you. 1 week later, something nobody expected happened. Karoline Leavitt walked back into the same studio where it all began. No cameras, no makeup, no audience, just her and a folded piece of paper in her hand. She asked the producer to deliver it to Captain Traoré. He opened it during a press conference the next day. It read, "I said sit down, boy, and you stood taller than I've ever seen a man stand. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope your people and my daughter grow up in a world where they learn from your strength, not my ignorance." The room fell silent as Captain Traoré looked up from the note. "We don't heal through silence," he said. "We heal through courage," and she just demonstrated some. From that day forward, even his harshest critics began calling him by a new name, the man who made America listen. The show returned to its regular programming. The world moved on to other news. But in that studio, one thing never changed. There's now a single empty chair placed in the center of the stage where Captain Traoré once sat. It's not labeled. It's not explained. But everyone who sees it knows what it represents. It means dignity. It means courage. It means that one man from Burkina Faso walked into a storm and emerged as a symbol of what's possible when we choose grace over anger, truth over theatrics, and humanity over hate. Later that year, Captain Traoré spoke at the United Nations. But it wasn't his speech that broke the internet. It was the moment he held up a small, handmade American flag drawn by that 8-year-old girl who had once smiled at him through a hospital screen. "This flag was given to me by a child who believed I represented something good," he said. "That means more than any medal." Then he looked into the camera one final time and said something that summarized everything. "America, don't just applaud. Change." So here's what I want to know. What part of this story impacted you the most? Was it when he spoke about his mother selling firewood? The letter from his brother? That little girl with her handmade flag? Drop a comment right now and tell me which moment gave you chills. And if this story moved you, if you felt that emotion in your throat, if you believe that dignity, grace, and truth still matter in this world, then hit that subscribe button, because here we don't just tell stories, we tell stories that transform how you see the world. Thanks for watching, and remember, never sit down when it's time to stand up for what's right.